I'll start recording.
All right.
Around your graduation.
Should be good.
What is that?
It's not sharing anymore. Or are you are screen sharing? We are good.
Okay.
Right. Anyway, maybe slide afternoon. Welcome to the City of Oakland Pavement Management Program. Before we turn the board there, we just had a couple of little announcements. As you may have already been aware, elections for the session next year are over right now. You should have all gotten out in the mail. If you don't see it, so you should have gotten one. Please reach out to the for getting policies. They will help you with that. They are doing this effort. Yeah, it's everyone. So please get that done. And then just a preview for December, we are customary next year happy hour location at thank you all.
All right, thank you so much, Terrence. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Sarah Fine. I'm with OakDOT, just down the street, and I am going to be presenting on our overall pavement management program, highlighting the way that we've incorporated equity into our program, and then as a new feature, for some of you who've seen this presentation before, there's a whole list of beautiful photos at the end of the projects we've done, which apparently people like to see. So, all right. And I wanted to also ask, are there folks on Zoom? There are just two people. Okay, all right. Great. Glad having one Zoom too. Before we get started, is it all lives in Oakland? Oh, okay, well, yeah, we're the same. Okay, very good. You guys, if you've been here longer than the paving plan has really been in motion, you remember the way the streets were, and hopefully you've seen changes in and about your neighborhood, if not right in front of your house, as we've done a ton of work in the last few years. What I want to do first is talk about where we were with our program and specifically how it was organized in terms of resources. And then I'll talk through what we proposed in the 2019 3-year paving plan. We've since adopted a 2022 5-year paving plan, which largely mirrors that. So they're kind of understood as the same focus and framework. And then I'll talk through a few nuances of what's happened after that. So first of all, back when we had an approach that we prioritized 80% of our budget every year to our major streets or arterials. 20% went to everything else. The 20% in particular was of interest to me when I took over the role because the 20% was the worst streets. And I was like, cool, okay, how do we evaluate that? Is there a formula? Oh no. You see an email from a council member and they tell you what their least favorite street is based on the amount of emails they get or phone calls from constituents who may or may not be donating to their campaigns. Who knows? I thought, oh, okay, cool. Well, at least we get a list, and then does the rest of Oakland know about the list? Oh, no, no one actually knows about it. When we get to council, sort of a list, you keep the spreadsheet in this folder. Okay, that's interesting. Then it was around the same time as Oakland passed its first infrastructure bond. And the infrastructure bond had language in the enabling ordinance that said we needed to spend those infrastructure dollars in many ways, and one of them was focused on equity. So one of the first things we understood was if we are massively increasing our paving budget, we do not want to maintain that current system where 20% of the dollars are being effectively determined by city council members based on whatever input they're getting from constituents who have aligned to them. As the pie gets bigger, their piece of the pie would get very big. So we wanted to reframe it. And before we get into how we reframe it, I'm going to just give you some context for Oakland's network. In general, we are about the same size as San Francisco. We have way less money. Our arterials comprise about half of our network. And so again, if we're spending 80% of our dollars on half of the network, that means that some of our streets are in fairly good condition, but it means the other half are in really bad condition. So you can see in the gray bands, that's our current pavement condition index. And 71, pretty good, it could be better, I would like to see in the 80s. 50, 56 is not great, right? 50 is really the cutoff for your poor streets. And from this, if you follow MTC and their annual paving conditions report, Oakland is always in the bottom of the pack, we're at risk, and we're really just trying to claw back up. And our overall PCI currently is 58. Which instantly I'm very proud of. I'll get to that next. Okay, so this is also showing you where we come from and what the investment from the infrastructure bonds has done. So just looking at arterials, you can see way back in 2012 when we were kind of doing okay, and then everything really got a lot better as we focused most of our dollars toward those arterials. So we were able to keep the majority of our arterials in good condition. That means AC transit buses are going through on streets and not hitting potholes everywhere, although it happens on local streets, of course. That means freight is moving and not really running into any issues. That means the majority of folks driving experience on arterials is a good experience. But the converse of our 80-20 program was that our local collector streets were the technical word is bombed out, I think. Those are the streets where you're on your bike and you're hitting potholes, swerving. And it does make sense because we weren't putting any money into that. And you know, the degradation curve of pavements goes pretty steep pretty fast. If you're not putting money in, you're gonna very quickly have a much more expensive street to rehabilitate and reconstruct. So you can see here in the expansion of that black band for our excellent quartet, over time, as the infrastructure bond money starts flowing in, we are suddenly seeing our local collective streets really expand in our good and excellent category. That is because with our pavement plan in 2019, we actually flipped that 80-25 and started investing even more in our local streets. Okay, just some more background. Annual budget for our program is around 60 million. I have 8 FTEs on our pavement design section. Overall, we do have city forces that perform some of our work, but the majority is done by contract. And this is a little bit of background on our money. This is also move everybody so you can see my full chart. Okay, so this is also a rationale for why things were so hit and miss for a long time. You can see all the different colors here. That's all the different types of money every year. So we really never knew from one year to the next where the 80% or the 20% was coming from. And you can see it was never very much. So 80% of 10 million is still not a whole lot, and 20% of 10 million is not much at all. In the black bands is what happened as we had the money flowing in from the infrastructure bonds after Measure KK. You can see that it's increasing over time, and we were able to scale up the program to actually deliver on those dollars, which is what this ends up looking like. So these are the miles that we were paving. These are centerline miles that we're paving every year. And I think a relevant statistic is just understanding what the average was before the infrastructure bond, the average after. And so you can see we were doing about 9 miles a year before and about 31 now. And that is increasing every year as we are able to keep ourselves in the 40s with that blip in fiscal 23. It's a little blip. We can talk about that more later. But we really hit above 40 as a comfortable pace. And I'm confident we can get over 50 with just a few more things ironed out. Okay, now I'm going to talk more about the plan itself. So again, old world, we had 80% on our major streets, 20% on our local streets. 2019 3-year plan had 25% to our major streets and 75% to local streets. So really flipping it around. And our 5-year plan in 2023, 22, I don't know why this is 2023. It was 2022. We just expanded what we were doing, just again, increasing the pie. The main thing that was different, in addition to flipping that distribution across the major streets and local streets, was how we chose the local streets. And again, you know, how it was the local streets, the worst streets would have been chosen by council discretion. We wanted to have a systematic and transparent way of identifying which local streets were going to be paved. I think there's a lot of metrics that are easy to point to for major streets. You can think about, oh, there's a bus line there. Oh, it has high ADT. Oh, it's a high injury street. But local streets, they're just matter a lot to the people who live there. And in a lot of ways, they're kind of equal in some ways. Like, what would distinguish a particular local street from another local street that we could get to in data and that people would agree with? One of the things we felt was really important was using this large area of money to drive our equity basis for the paving plan. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that. And I'll show you in a couple more slides, but for now, I think it's helpful just to see the bulk of the local streets program is prioritized by what it ended up being equity and street condition. But we also had a few other set asides that I want to talk about. The first one, you see 5% for neighborhood bikeways. So streets that were not already prioritized in our local streets program, we went through another round after we picked out all those streets and said, are any streets left over that have a low PCI that are identified either as an existing or a proposed neighborhood bike route through our existing citywide bike plan. Let's add a little carve out for those and add those to the plan. Then in the yellow is 10% for utility cost share. In Oakland, we have pretty rigorous restoration requirements for utilities who are performing pipeline work. When they're done, they not only have to restore the trench, but they have to do what amounts to a 13-foot wide travel lane of restoration above that. Once you factor that in a lot of streets in Oakland, you've already paved a third to a half of the street. So we set aside 10% of this overall local streets budget to say, I want a pool of money I can use to do the rest of the street when PG&E or EV is already doing 1/3. So we set that aside. So that's picking up another round of streets that are in poor condition. All right, OakDOT is in the house. And then you can see I still have 5% at council discretion. I wasn't going to get rid of that. That's really helpful because what we did this time is we prepared a big plan. It was a big map with a lot of lines on it. And we did that to say, here's the plan. We're not really asking for input. We're saying, here's what it is. And if you have an issue, you don't see your street on it, you can talk to your council member. So it really deflected off staff because we had a basis for selecting all the streets that we selected. But there's also the times in which maybe we don't, and there's no way for us to know what is a special street in a particular council district, where people, maybe for some reason, the data condition doesn't quite reflect in our data because there's also some community use on that street that's super important. Well, this was a way for those desires and the community level understanding to get to the council member, and then they could give us a list that we then turn into a formal memo that we sent out to the world saying, here's council member, council 1's list, here's council district 2's list. Everything was public and done. So after they sent us the list, there was no more, oh, but I want to switch this out. No, you gave us the list, it's all that's been folded into the plan. So they still have that discretionary option to pick a lot of streets still. In fact, this was more than they'd ever gotten picked. But there was a timeline certainty of closing the door on that, and it was public. It was a public document. Okay. That's 4% for preventive maintenance. Preventive maintenance, sorry, sale microservicing, you want to do it to extend the life of good pavements. We've never had good pavements that were in our local streets program, so we never had a need for this. But starting with the 2019 3-year plan, we've got enough miles on local streets, we want to now preserve them. And that was an amazing accomplishment, just getting the work out to get those local streets miles in. So in 2022, we have a 5-year plan in 2022. We have enough local streets that need to be maintained that we can set aside 4% of our budget for preventive maintenance. Excited about that. And then the major streets program, how we picked those streets was primarily based on Street Saver. Folks are familiar with Street Saver? You, I know. So Street Saver is giving you the ability to basically tell it, here's my budget, here's my desired PCI, help me identify the best optimized set of streets to do solar sale on and the ability to get to those outputs. We started from that. One of the things it does, though, it kind of gives you like a block here and 4 blocks there and 3 blocks over there. And that doesn't really work when you're trying to also use your paving program to implement major transportation projects. You can't do much in a block. You're trying to do a road guide that doesn't work. You need 17 blocks to put it together to make a full transportation project make sense. So we did actually a lot of hand editing. We went through and looked at what got spit out from Street Saver for our major streets program and said, oh, this street's actually on our high entry network, but we've only got 4 blocks out of what would 8 would be the actual transportation project decided for us at high entry network issue. So we did some hand editing, added blocks here, stayed blocks there. And then that's how we came up with our favorite streets portion. Okay. Equity. So this is a slide that we presented to every community meeting we went to. We wanted to make sure that wherever we were stepping into, we all shared definitions of what we were talking about related to equity. I think this is important because this was not like Sarah or Chris coming in and say, this is what I think equity is. These are definitions that are coming from our Department of Race and Equity in Oakland. We say, this is how the City of Oakland is defining this. And it's helping us understand who we're talking about. We're talking about underserved populations. These are people of color, low-income households, people with disabilities, households with severe rent burden, people with limited English proficiency, and youth and seniors. And so we're looking at these folks because these are communities and populations that have both experienced current disparities and historic disparities in Oakland and generally in the US. Then equity, when we frame things around equity, we're saying it's a goal. We don't really know that we're going to get there, it's where we're trying to get to. But it means that to achieve that stated goal, we need to prioritize the needs of those underserved populations. And when we do that, we really focus on our local street program, like I said earlier. There's a lot of ways you can define equity, especially using data. But one thing that was important to me as we developed this program was we knew we wanted to be presenting as a community meeting. So it doesn't usually happen for pavement management programs, but we knew with this big change and incorporating equity, we need to be able to communicate about it. And one of the things that was important to me was that we had some way of talking about this program that anyone could speak to, whether it's a technical expert or someone that just got brought in to present on behalf of the team. And we wanted it to be easily understood by everyone. So here's my test. Let's see. I'll move this around also. I don't think you guys can see my legend. Maybe. Okay. I can just, what? You're learning so much today. Okay. So how we distributed work, the paving resources in our local streets program, we used 2 factors. The first was the share of local streets in poor condition. That's maybe more straightforward. So within each of these planning areas, how many of Oakland's overall streets in poor condition are in that planning area? So it's your share of streets that are in poor condition. We did the same thing thinking about our underserved population. So in Central East Oakland, what is the share of Oakland's overall underserved population in Central East Oakland? It happens to be 30%. So Central East Oakland has 18% of streets that are in poor condition, and it has 30% of the share of underserved populations. We're taking each of those definitions that I was providing earlier, and each of those actually count as an instance of being underserved. So the universe that we're looking at is not actually the population of Oakland, like 400,000, but it's 1 million. Because if I'm low income and I'm a person of color, I count twice. That's how we did it. Okay. Move. Great. This slide is kind of helping orient, in case you're not familiar with Oakland, how this looks geographically. So these are our planning areas. We also wanted to make sure we were not using council districts, which are political boundaries, and have an inherent tit for tat with council members. We used something that was outside of a council district and understood through planning documents like our bike plan and prior pedestrian plan, creating these generally understood definitions. So you have West Oakland, downtown, and then we're focusing right now on East Oakland and North Oakland Hills. And you can see the distribution. What's interesting is in Oakland, we really found that there's kind of a fair distribution of streets in poor condition. The hills have bad streets, the flats had bad streets. But what's different is where underserved residents are living. And one of the rationales that we focused on was, what is the impact of a street in poor condition in the hills on the people who live in the hills? Again, we're not talking about arterials. We're talking about the street right in front of someone's house. As we prepared this approach, one of the things we considered was, what if I'm driving and the thing that happens to a lot of people is you're driving, hit a pothole, it bends your axle, there's some kind of work you have to get done on your car. do you have the ability to take off work easily? Can you go get that done? Do you have the cash on hand for a $400, $500 or more fix because you hit a pothole in the street? That's a very different experience if your the median income is more like 60 or 50,000 versus 100 or 190 or over 200,000, which is the difference in these planning areas. I'll just say a quick aside. When we did a community meeting in the North Oakland Hills, people were like, well, but what about if my gardener hits a pothole? That's real.
How's the answer?
Very politely. So then we came up with what we're calling the funding share, and that's those two factors just evenly distributed. So that means Central East Oakland, based on both its share of streets in poor condition and its share of Oakland's underserved residents, it gets 24% of our local streets dollars. And then the other area we just talked about was North Oakland Hills. So it had 17% of Oakland streets in poor condition and 3% of our underserved residents. It gets 10% of the dollars. Importantly, in the moment this framework was introduced, the amount of money we were going to be pushing out through this framework was so much more than it was previously. So actually North Oakland Hills was still seeing like 2 or 3 times more dollars in that planning area than it would ever see in like 10 years. So I don't want to underscore that the challenge around equitable distribution is very different when everyone's getting more. That's just the truth. Okay, then here's like the inputs and the outputs, right? So we had our share of local streets in poor condition, share of underserved residents. We just talked about that. Now here's the share of local streets paving funding. I just covered that. And then last, this is coming upon the end of the 3-year plan, the final share of mileage. This to me is the important outcome measurement. Did we actually put the money where we thought it would go? Did the work actually get constructed? Did we actually spend the money where we wanted to? So I am proud North Oakland Hills got 10% of the mileage in the 3-year plan. And you can't see this, but I'll shift our zoom around again. In East Oakland, we actually overperformed. So we wanted at least 24% of the funding to be in East Oakland. We ended up with 30% of the mileage. Good job, Oakland. Okay. All right. Other things. It's not just a paving program. We do lots of things in our program. So the rest of my presentation is going to be focused on the complete streets of our program. And these are metrics that we both are asked to report on and we take a lot of pride in reporting on because it really does represent how important it is to fully fund this program. We not only maintain the street and make streets smoother, but we implement new bikeways. We upgrade existing bikeways. You can see the performance indicators there. We have averaged in the last 4 years, 7 new miles of bikeways a year and 3 miles of upgraded bikeways. We are the primary delivery machine for bikeways in Oakland. Crosswalks, we count, too much to these people's dismay, we count how many crosswalks we actually implement because I think that's a really important metric to also maintain. Curb ramps, we've averaged 400 ramps a year based on the paving program. That's actually a little bit low. We hit over 1,200 ramps last year. So that's just the average. But that number is significant and it is by far the largest producer of programs in the city. Other programs are like 20 or 30 each a year, maybe. So we're the bulk team, or the Costco of OakDOT. Sidewalk replacement. This is something that I'm not aware of a lot of other paving programs that incorporate this. When we come into pave, we're of course doing our DOJ required curb ramp improvements at every farm, and we're doing rehab. But because that involves a concrete sub, we go, oh, well, let's pick up some sidewalk damage at the same time. So we have another set of folks who go out and do a field inspection and mark out all the areas of damage up and down the streets we're paving. We send a notice to the property owner. Here's how much it would cost for the city to use its contractor to make these repairs. Do you want us to do this? Yes, no. If you say no, you have to find your own contractor. If you say yes, then we'll just do it and send you the bill. That amounts to, like I'm saying here, an average of 45,000 square feet of sidewalk replacement every year. Overall, we see around 100 to 150,000 square foot sidewalk replacement total, inclusive of people who are just doing it on their own. So it's another huge driver of some of the accessibility improvements that ultimately are super important to the city. So again, it's like, here's the big truck, it's moving, what else can we put on that truck? Last, the performance standard that's new is we're looking to make sure that every year at least 77% of the miles are in the 6 planning areas that are a majority of people of color. So that's a new equity-based performance measure that we're looking at. And then obviously it's a paving program, we want to understand how has our pavement condition improved overall. And so these are the goals from the 5-year plan, to have our major streets increase from 72 to 75, and have our local streets increase from 50 to 61. Okay, all right, beautiful photos. Okay, so these are all photos of projects that have been implemented through Oakland's paving program. You may recall Ballard City up in Telegraph. This was our protected bike project that was implemented after we did a major pavement rehab. We really focused, this is around 2020. We wanted to identify how we could add just kind of some icing on top of a paving project with not a significant amount of concrete or civil design, but enabling us to still perform things like a protected bike lane. So you can see the use of plastics and other markings to create those safe zones for cyclists. And then we also are identifying, this is on East Foothill at East 15. This is the before photo, obviously, of a slurry seal project. So again, the project here is quite minimal in terms of cost. We're doing a very low cost pavement treatment, but it's an opportunity to add some other resources. And this is actually us working through floating bulldogs. So we're not having to adjust drainage, but we're adding that additional bulk at the crosswalk to give pedestrians better visibility as they're crossing and give drivers more visibility for pedestrians. We're also implementing a road diet. So this was 2 lanes with sharrows in one, and we dropped from 2 lanes to 1 and have a buffered bike lane. And you can see the finished product with those floating islands. So in terms of design work, this is something that in this case, the contractor was able to lay out in the field. We did have an idea of where we wanted them to be, but we're not doing survey for these because they're not a surface that someone has to walk over. So it allows us to save on costs there. We're the same benefit in many ways. You may not know, bus lanes on Broadway. That was a paving project in Oakland. We implemented this project in 2020, like in the first maybe 6 months of the pandemic. Maybe there's a benefit to that because no one's outside. And no one was like, what the hell, what's this project? One of the reasons though that we did this was Broadway had been on our paving event for a while. And there were some questions about what we would do on Broadway. We actually got around to repaving it. We put the markings back the way it was. You know, it's kind of an important transit street. This was actually during the time, if you recall, that AC Transit was building out its tempo stops downtown. And dating back to a lot of decisions that former planners, engineers made a long time ago, there was never going to be bus lanes on Broadway. I went back and like researched why, like how to use the bottom of it. One of the rationales was there would be too many buses. There's a reason for that. It was because they were concerned, they understood that there would be separation for the bus lane. And it would make sense if you had all the buses on Broadway that couldn't go around each other, they would be stuck in the same lane and that wouldn't work. But it was so funny to me to go back and realize the reason we didn't have bus lanes planned on Broadway was just too many buses. We do not have any kind of separation for the bus lanes on Broadway, so it makes a lot of sense to add them. It was also a prime moment because AC Transit was coming in with their full BRT project. They would be doing all this construction in downtown. The street was torn out for a while. Great time to come in and just fundamentally change the work of the street. Also, it looked like it was part of the BRT project, and it was supposed to be, so it was. But we went to council, made sure that we buttoned up all of the outstanding items around the designation for Broadway, and then ultimately we were able to slot in our pavement contract right after all those the bus boarding, bus platforms, and then the bus paths were done. We came in with our contractor to Mill and Overlady Street and then put in the bus lanes. AC Transit. It was actually a lot of fun to work with them because we wanted to make sure it was seamless. Okay, here's another photo of another project. This is more recent. This is West Grand Avenue. And this is a project where we actually ended up implementing 3 protected intersections in this area, and the designers were here in the room with us. We can give them some applause later on. But I'm proud of this project because this is all designed in-house. And as you can see here, this is one of our contractors and some staff on both on our team and construction management are laying out the what we used to call the biscuits, but the form of the protected intersections in the field. So if you've been out here recently, I don't have a beautiful after photo, but this is the same shot. So here they are laying it out, and then it's been partially constructed. Yes. Oh, and then we have also as we head toward the bridge, there's a short stint of a two-way cycle track. And this is also during, we're not quite done in the photo, obviously. What I wanted to convey about this project is we often have a question internally about how much do we turn up the volume on the complete streets elements of our projects. And when the louder you turn it up, the more you have to turn up the nozzle or the node around engagement and outreach. And in this case, there had been a plan for a road diet from 6 to 4 for a long time and adding buffer bike lanes. It was dating back to the West Oakland specific plan, which was 2012. Maybe Mark worked on it, I don't know. And it had never been implemented because there's also this question of what to do on Grand Avenue. Bike lanes. Well, but that means moving all the parking out in a neighborhood where not a lot of people bike yet. It would take a lot of to get engagement up and down the street to move all the parking spaces out and engage around, is this the neighborhood to have the bike lane? One of the things that we were aware of though, and I'll just shift to this slide, this is what we ended up with. We knew we wanted to do the buffered bike lane. We knew it would take too much to pull out and try to, we would still in engagement right now if we're trying to do effective bike lanes on this grant. But one of the important things we're realizing is the key points of conflict are the intersection in those cases. And if we can do this at each major intersection where we have intersecting bikeways, we've really done at least, we put our stake in the ground that there should probably be bikeways on the street at some point. And we've addressed some critical conflict points along the way. So if someone comes up later with a grant, probably, to do a more massive project that may have to include a bus lane for AC Transit, this is going over the bridge, we don't know. We can have that conversation later. We've already put our stake in the ground that at least there should be a protected bike lane here. And we've done this interim treatment that addresses a lot of the need in the area right now. Also along the way, we removed train tracks. If you've been in West Oakland recently, I love trains. I don't like train tracks in our streets. So we have been removing a ton of old railroad tracks in West Oakland. They actually have a litany of claims associated with them as people hit them. They bought them out of their car. In addition to, you know, just a bit of that. We try to get rid of that. Okay. We also, this is like a little snippet of the work we did at Monty Park, but you guys went to the Father's game? No, that's how beautiful streets were around Monty Park. You're welcome. We were able to jump in. We have a special way we've organized our contracts that are as needed contracts. So we have an established list of costs for each typical item, and we issue work orders based on it. So we're not newly bidding every time we have a new project. And we can simply say, okay, we would like you to now do this. We already know how much it's going to cost because you did that out a year ago, but you can hold your old price. And we'd like you to now show up here to do that work. And so we were able to jump in and mobilize Spark and Hester over this area, did a ton of track removal, curb ramps, paving. We also did some sidewalk infill. So I wanted to just show off again. We're trying to improve accessibility of our program. I'm proud of this as well. Okay, this last one. Beautiful downtown Oakland. Pay no mind to the car and the bike lane. There's a learning curve for everyone. This is 13th Street, and you can see we've got back in angle parking adjacent to a buffered bike lane. This was a 4-to-1 road diet. 4-to-1 road diet. That's what we did. And this is also in conjunction with the 14th Street project, which is in construction right now. There was a desire to add back parking and it lost from that. And so we always knew we needed to do diagonal parking on 13th Street when we paved it. We also had a requirement that we pave it around the same time that that project was going, which meant also trying to line those things up. When we knew that we needed to have diagonal parking, though, we actually all looked at it. Parking backing up into one travel lane that's really close to a buffered bike lane. You know, there's some resources on this. There's some other design treatments that we could evaluate. So back in angle parking is not new, it's not new, but it's always a little bit of and you can see mostly the compliance, this was actually, I think, really soon after it was implemented. as we've done some sweeps, the compliance is much higher. Some folks are getting approved, and this is before any signage is put in, finding people out to parks. So overall pleased with that as well. Okay. That would be enough, right? That would be all the projects would be enough, but we've also been recognized in other areas. And I show this just to underscore, and particularly we to incorporate equity in our program and also to incorporate all these additional projects into the program. Pavement programs don't usually pick up connected bikes, don't usually pick up bus lanes for transit. But we won awards for it. So if you were driven by recognition externally, these are good reminders. Our paving plan itself won an award from the California Transportation Foundation for the questionably titled Sustainable Environmental Project of the Year. I don't know if I would usually put that with a paving plan, but we took it, we accepted the award. The Telepark project won an ACAC award for engineering excellence. Our program and our director was featured on NPR. And then overall, we were written up in a good government article about equity in urban investment. Proud of that. And then really to me, the most shiny trophy in the lot is that in 2022, Measure U was approved by voters at 75%. Part of the drive for our program was we got one bond. We need to get the next one. We have to demonstrate that we can push work out, we can pave streets, we can do curb maps, we can do all things voters expected when they initially approved Measure KK. And we have to keep doing it because we have to fund more of this. We have to get to a place where we don't need a lot in the future. So Measure U in 2022 was really a referendum in my mind about whether we've done the work voters approved for the program bond measure. So I'm very proud of 75% approval for people taxing themselves in California. Almost doesn't get better. Okay, that's it for me. And I do want to recognize a few people amidst us. So Paulo Neris is back here in the back being very quiet. Paulo is a project manager of almost all the projects you saw in the deal, and also the photographer for many of them. And Ben Granberry in the front row. This engineer in our program has himself designed many of the projects you've seen as well. Kudos to them. And then Cristiano, alumnus of the paving program, and now I'm a supervising civil engineer managing his own street state team. So that's who you got for this. I'm happy to take questions.
You're talking about the street condition and soft PCI. I'm super familiar with that, but is that a distinction between like the street condition for cars versus how different things?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. PCI itself is kind of a composite score. When the inspector is doing that evaluation, they're actually selecting a sample of its segment. And so they're going out and they're measuring the amount in terms of square footage and the severity of different defects that they're seeing. That gets kind of plugged into a formula and then gets spit out into a PCI. It does not take into account the literal single locations of potholes, which everyone expects it to, but that would actually be an interesting like liability if we knew exactly where the pothole was. It does give you a score. It's general. It is assessing kind of from 100 how much you take off based on the defects you're seeing. I think that there's a lot of interest to be more granular with pavement addition, and certainly when we have a project, we are looking at how that street is going to affect all users. But PCI is really for a budgeting purpose. It's to say, overall, under a big system, how much money do you need to make this next state of good repair? And it's not so much a tool for selecting individual locations to go out and chase. Yeah, good question.
I have a question. So it seems a lot of the improvements are big price paint and plastic, or I guess you said short-term term things such as the plastic ballers, spreading out buffer areas. I'm just curious about like what's like your experience with compliance with the paint and plastic and needing to replace the plastic?
So this was level 1 for us. And we learned pretty quickly that level 1 in Oakland is like actually more like level -10. So what sticks around in other states does not stick. So these things got demolished pretty quickly. This was probably like the first couple of weeks after the project.
So that's why you start seeing this. We start building things. We start building things that don't require survey. We start building this. This is a permanent improvement to me. I don't know. This street. There's another one with the string. This is a permanent improvement to your question. This is a permanent improvement. It will still get knocked around and maybe be replaced, but we just can't do the paint and post. The compliance isn't there, the maintenance is definitely not there. But I think what's important is that the cost of this is actually not as exorbitant as we used to encounter. We're also seeing, I think, just having more cash in the paving program allows us to see this more as a little bit of budget does compared to the cost of rehabilitating the street. We're also, because we're implementing the Complete Streets project, we have additional budget to support the paving program if we were doing these additional pieces. So it's kind of a, again, the delivery vehicle, they don't have targets going, we're putting all the packages we can in that truck.
So, okay, first of all, I think you're absolutely right to talk about the 77% validation. Ultimately. There we go. I love traffic in this area. And I see some tire marks, look cool. We heard about that, positive traction. But I've been noticing. And we're up a lot of the right turns, and we're facing some challenges that weren't there before. But are you getting feedback on that part of it? In terms of noticing things like
on this one, this is Market Street, so we actually did a lot of work with AC Transit to really hone in on exactly how long these islands could be and where they need to be positioned in relationship to their turning movements. That was a really important piece of the internal work we did. So not to, and I don't want to dismiss the design that folks have done. I mean, it's designed like that we're not moving inlets, we're not moving poles, but there's still a lot of work that the team did to coordinate and evaluate those needs. And to your question, have we heard from like folks? I have seen in the very early days a couple photos that to us of like someone who like not made the turn and just ramped up on top. That's just pure driver error. Like if you're ramping over this in that diagonal angle, like you just weren't driving correctly. But in terms of clipping, I don't know that we've seen or heard of any significant clipping. But that's kind of also to be understood. Like the point of these things is to keep someone out of that area, and if they're clipping it and they've gone too far.
Next step, and are we noticing a change in collision incidents or rates of anything associated with this type of improvements?
The project that would really have the best results so far is Telegraph Avenue, because it's been about 4 years. This is still fresh. This was done in the last 9 months. So we really want to take a couple of years to evaluate dust levels. Everyone gets used to whatever it is. Are we seeing sustained differences in crash rates? And even still, I'm a little bit anxious about saying like, oh, crashes are down because crashes are there's such a small set of data anyway. So you're making a pretty big assessment over a kind of small sample. But in the aggregate, be interested to see if overall, like paving road diet projects that have fancy stuff like this, if we're seeing a better improvement in crashes. But we actually don't know that we've done analysis yet, even on Telegraph and Scout yet.
Implementation of the areas how to improve the street fronts.
That is something that, and I'm not calling it out, that is something that came up only from white people. they were concerned that that gentrification might occur. When we went to community meetings in City of Oakland, the response by and large was, what did you say? Are you really gonna do this? I don't believe you're gonna do what you said. And to me, I was like, oh, that's good feedback. We don't have trust to actually deliver. So first we need to actually deliver. And then if we really think that there's concomitant effects of us paving a street or putting in curb ramps, then that also might be an indication that there's a whole host of other problems in Oakland. If that's the thing, that triggers gentrification. So I think by and large, the feedback we've gotten is you're about 10 years too late. Glad you're here. Get on with it.
Yeah, I think one just kind of building off of the discussion about crashes and crash effectiveness is it might also be interesting to look at some of the other nearby cities where they've been doing resurfacing projects, but notably have not implemented any recommendations from like their bike lane or traffic calming improvements. I'm thinking of like Rose Street in Berkeley.
Oh, we don't call people out by name.
They've now been like seen, like they've documented increases in average travel speed on that street because the pavement quality has been improved. And so when you're looking at crash reduction effectiveness, like it's not necessarily just a one direction travel, like car crashes going down. It's like actually looking at the comparison against what happens when you repave those streets and don't do anything.
Yeah, that is that's an interesting idea. And then that also makes me think of one piece of feedback in particular we do get, which is now people are speeding on my street. So the potholes acted as a speed hump. No one could actually speed because they were constantly braking, and now folks are going really fast. And something I didn't cover is, primarily this is focused on local streets in this current respect, but when we're paving a local street, we are kind of auto implementing speed humps if it's on a neighborhood bike route, which we didn't used to do. In general, in Oakland, we require a petition of everyone on the block to get a speed hump added. That does two things. It kind of honestly, it meters the requests a bit so we can actually evaluate each of them. It also confirms that everyone on the street actually wants the speed humps. I don't know if folks in this room might be surprised, not everyone wants speed humps. So you put them in if people are like, who told you to do this? I don't want that. People slow down too much and then they go fast again and it's loud. I hate the noise. Like there are so many reasons people have come up with to not want speed humps. So the petition is sort of covered for us to put them in because we were like, well, everyone on the block said they wanted them. And we are talking about the smallest piece of infrastructure, right? But there's a lot of high touch involved with it. But for our neighborhood bike routes, we have identified there should be really a kit of parts. When we do a neighborhood bike route, we should be doing the things that we know need to be done for traffic calming, and speed humps are one of them. I think we might move to a situation where we do things like, oh, average speed is X after the project. We need to understand whether we need to add traffic calming on a local street, if it's like auto added, even if it's not on the neighborhood bike route. We're not there yet. The other thing I wanted to add, and not shown in any photos, is our project on High Street. And High Street was really kind of modeling somewhat off of 35th Avenue, where we did speed humps on an arterial. And that has kind of been a third rail for a long time. 35th Avenue really had too many high-speed crashes, and I think we kind of went like, what else are we going to do here? So working with AC Transit, we designed speed cushions that they can still navigate around and then still provide some level of speed deterrence on an arterial. We did that also on High Street. So that's not shown here, but it's another thing we've been doing. Terrence, you had a question a while ago.
Yeah, still on this.
So
We'll
do a field trip next time.
Yeah, I started. I've been taking field trips myself for a while now, but I started to but yeah, could you just talk a little bit more about like, ways you were able to find cost savings and whether you're sort of getting this or seeing this in peer cities as opposed to sort of just being like an innovation,
Ways we are seeing cost savings for what?
for like implementing, semi-permanent,
Okay.
permanent problem intensive prices.
I can answer part of that. I don't know that I have enough to answer the whole question. I think a big part of this is that we do have that established bid schedule that says, the curb and gutter is X, the concrete sidewalk is Y. And it allows us to know with some certainty how much something's going to cost. So typically you're just preparing a full PSC and you bid it out and like, well, we think we know what it's gonna cost and the market's gonna tell us what it actually costs and oh, it's more than we thought. Oh, we gotta cut some things out. What gets cut out are like things like this usually. So this allows us a little bit more certainty about what something's gonna cost beforehand. So I would just note that that's been pretty helpful internally for making decisions like this, but I think for us, the ability to design in-house is also a huge piece of it. In prior years, I don't know that we had, the capacity to design work like this in-house, nor maybe the interest or expertise. And now we do, and that's been amazing because you're not then navigating, no offense to anyone here, consulting contracts. Wrong crowd, wrong crowd. It is just important to have that. And again, this also used to be only something that our bike ped group had the expertise on, but that's been spreading as more folks come into the overall DOT with interest in bike facilities and have interest or expertise. There's that. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
I just feel like y'all implemented a bunch of these with a lot less fuss. And
A lot
Any-
less fuss. I think another piece of it is actually, and maybe this is a different answer, uncoupling from a major like traffic signal modification just reduces the amount of impact. So you don't have like a corner open for months while people are potholing. It's just a smaller project. We didn't have to get federal money to do it. So it didn't take us 3 years to go through like all the approvals needed to actually bid the project. So I think maybe that's another facet of it. We actually, it's not shown here, but we did add RFBs here. It's not a photo. No, is that one? Not that one, not the intersection. We added 2 or 3 RFBs on this project too, just because we already had a line item in our bid schedule for it. And, or did we? Maybe we had to get a new pricing for it. But that we were able to do like everything up to a project that would otherwise need to go for ATP funding and then wait us, you know, a timeline of like 10 years to actually design and implement it. So maybe that's what you're seeing too. Okay. So, yeah.
How are you prioritizing where you put the floating bulb outs? Do you have a process for that?
Yeah. That's a great question. Okay, I'm gonna go back to our example here. I'm off West Grand. We can't talk about West Grand anymore. This one I think is a good example. So this is, the way I'm gonna answer that is overall, our program says to all of our internal stakeholders, our bike ped group, our planning teams, our Safe Streets, which does this traffic speed hump request program. We kind of say, give us what you want us to do. Or tell us the rubric by which we do the thing you want, so that we can do something quickly without making a lot of individual like discernment. Here, there was really like a Safe Streets audit and conversation with the school that promoted this idea that these intersections around Garfield Elementary needed to get fixed. There may have also been like some crash history. I'm not certain on that, but we had already mobilized to have a planning focus at this intersections, and we just sort of took that information and implemented it in our project, rather than them having to go out individually to bid out that job. So that's us taking in information. We did not do this at every single corner up or down the street, which could be an approach, but we didn't take that approach. Here it was, tell us what you want. Same thing on speed humps. Again, if there's an existing queue of the petition speed humps that have already been approved, we just put them into the project. We add them to our plans. Protected intersections on West Grand was more of an internal call, just identifying, I think, a little bit of the currents around, well, the bike plan calls for protected bike lanes. What's the best we can do? I'm trying to think of another example. I don't know. Like with floating islands, one of the, it's part of the kit of parts now, is that kit of parts is being redefined for neighborhood bikeways. And so I think we're going to see more floating islands, even in neighborhood context, as a neighborhood bike route crosses like an uncontrolled intersection. So I think the approach is we want to have, and our project managers need as little like decision making on those respects as possible to be able to do their jobs because of the volume we're doing. we can't have like, oh, what about this and what about that and what about that every time. We need to really have kind of a standard approach. That standard approach has been changing a lot as well. So it's kind of like, here's the standard approach now, as in particular, the bike ped team redefines what a neighborhood bikeway hit up parts is. It might change in the future. But we're taking in input from our colleagues, and the approaches that they take to identify the locations that warrant additional investment are reflected in our plans.
I'm also seeing you use floating islands on approaches to traffic circles. I've seen that in a couple of places, which I think is really useful for helping like channelize people.
Yeah.
The right term.
That's true. I guess I like took that as more, it's a design element of the traffic circle. Yeah. That didn't answer your question.
Kind of. In the sense that it's still no, I guess is what I hear.
Say your question again, make sure I understood.
How you're prioritizing floating bulb outs,
Oh, floating boat in particular?
or just any kind of like traffic calming at the intersection, and it sounds like mainly taking in those recommendations rather than.
Yeah, our team does very little early stage assessment.
Okay.
We're taking in the guidance or direction from other teams that are doing engagement or doing programmatic approaches like through the neighborhood bike program to identify when those should be added.
So then, I guess follow-up question, does the general plan, since it's getting updated right now and doing a lot of engagement, does that affect your program?
Oh, like the LUT, like the land use and transportation of the general plan?
Yes.
No, I don't want to answer.
Okay, no worries.
I don't look at the general plans. Yeah, I think the most, what's that?
Not a fan. You don't have to say.
No,
Yeah.
I think what's most important for any, I think, design program is knowing when to do what.
Mhm.
I think general plans are too high level for that, and I think, like the bike plan update that we may or may not do at some point,
Mhm.
updates to our design guidance on particular elements really needs to tell us what to do at a granular.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same question on what are the packages on the van, the standard venue? You also do red curve for daylighting on local streets as part of repaving, if it doesn't already.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, daylighting for, pedestrian visibility, that's on every street we're doing. It's part of it's a detail, that's the standard. I don't have a sense of time, so.
Give about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe 2 more questions.
Fire, has that been a challenge at all, or you guys do it?
We're best friends.
How involved is it?
On our work, not very much. We are mindful of the requirements. There are others who are trying to navigate adjustments to those requirements that, are having the challenges that you'd be aware of. I think the 26-foot clear is just really problematic, for the work we want to do, but it is what it is for now. So we follow the rules.
Kind of going back and talking about and kind of comparing the bus lanes along Broadway to those on the international.
Yeah.
Since they were done kind of at a similar time, and maybe giving the lanes to Broadway. They're obviously different. There's more routes on Broadway, but like with how different they are and the plastic bollards on international, have there been any trends and realized any things that?
That's a great question, and one I'm not fully able to answer, because I'm not working on the rapid response on international, but I will say the reason these look different from the beginning was that they were different agencies implementing them, and AC Transit was working on designs that had been created and then value engineered for several years, maybe a decade even, and what you ended up with was maybe not necessarily where initially they thought it would be. Like I said, there was originally an intent to have a curb separating the bus lane on international. You wouldn't have needed red paint because you had a curb. curve went away, other things changed. We were able to look like heroes because we showed up way later and were able to like plan and design our project after theirs had already been fully cooked and funded by FTA. So that's, I think, the key difference. You know, if we had started from scratch on international, it would have looked different, knowing what we know now. But certainly having the red paint was both like, we felt important on Broadway because of the number of buses and also just a proof of concept that that's probably pretty important for the street with the most buses in the East Bay.
I like how you like added in the paving elements in the project, and now that the project is being extended.
Yeah.
Are you intending to do the same thing?
Not my project, that is a different team. But yes, that is, my understanding is that they're doing red lane still on that part, but I actually don't know for sure. That's a, we got a federal raise grant for a significant amount of work from